they still run that spread option to a certain extent, but they're a little bit more prototypical in the way they attack you. Michael Pratt was a true freshman who played a majority of the season last year for Tulane. Completed about 55% of his passes, 20 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. So he's much more serviceable back there throwing the ball than some of the guys that they've had in the past. But yeah, in that game, Tulane ran up and down the field the first 2 possessions. Then certainly Oklahoma adjusted and then played much better defensively. But I think you would take a 56-14 game. Specifically, Oklahoma's giving 31. But I think specifically from a defensive perspective, anything under 17, I think it would be a great success for that first game. But they've got a lot of weapons. I think there's discussion kind of in the preseason and in the offseason was talking about, okay, this Tulane game could be more difficult for Oklahoma than Nebraska, and you scoff at that in the early season. I was like, even though Nebraska is a little bit down, but the dishevelment within that program right now it's hard to ignore. And those of us that watched that game Saturday showed, because early in the game they were talking about how Scott Frost felt like this was their best team, and it just looked like more of the same, maybe even worse. So I think it's not a foregone conclusion that this Tulane team could present some bigger challenges to Oklahoma, specifically on the offensive side of the ball.
Brett Bielema is a good coach, and he will upgrade that program, I would expect. But sure, Illinois is arguably the worst team in the Big Ten.
Sure.
And maybe Nebraska's arguably the worst team in the Big Ten. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. When you look at their schedule, my goodness, this was about the lightest touch they had on the Big Ten schedule. So the numbers are stacked up against them and trying to salvage this season and get to a bowl game. And I'm usually not the alarmist that comes out with those kind of statements before Labor Day. But again, it's Nebraska is a full touchdown favorite against Illinois, losing to a team that was last in the Big Ten in defense and scoring, and just across the board, pretty much the worst or second worst team in the Big Ten, and they just lost. You went down the path of Tulane, and obviously Nebraska is scheduled as the premier non-conference opponent, but Tulane has not been necessarily a factor in the American Conference, which has been the strongest of the group of 5, but they've been a team that has, under Willie Fritz, has now routinely, after being down for a long time, has been winning 6 or 7 ball games, going to bowl games, again, in a pretty tough conference, having to play Memphis and UCF and Navy and Cincinnati and a lot of decent football playing schools. And they went to another bowl game last year. And you mentioned the young quarterback, Michael Pratt, as a freshman. He led the nation in touchdown passes for freshmen with 20 last year. They do have their top 4 wide receivers coming back. The 2 Oklahoma fans you may want to look out for, just to get acquainted with the personnel, would be Deuce Watts and Jaquan Jackson. Each caught 31 passes last year. And they've got quite a running back tandem of Tyjae Spears. Cameron Carroll ran for 12 touchdowns last year. And they actually led the American Conference, were top 10 in the nation in explosive running plays. So with all that running back and wide receiver productivity coming back, with a quarterback who showed quite a bit as a true freshman, offensively, they could pose a threat and be a pretty good team to get some reps on.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, Mark. I think the biggest challenge of this game will be on the Oklahoma defense. I think it's a good measuring stick to certainly start the season. Obviously to see what the improvement looks like. As you mentioned, Tulane was a team under Willie Fritz, I believe, 3 straight bowl games, if I'm not mistaken. They were 6-6 a year ago. They lost 3 games by a combined 12 points, I believe. So very easily could have been a 9-3 team. But yeah, I think offensively they were, it looks like here, almost 35 points per game is what they averaged a year ago. Certainly it was mostly mostly a conference schedule, but still, they've offensively they're much improved even from what Oklahoma saw in 2017. So being able to the skill positions are solid, as you mentioned, Michael Pratt. Maybe not necessarily what you would like to see from a completion percentage perspective, but for a true freshman, 20 touchdowns to 8 interceptions is an excellent ratio there. And you'd mentioned that they back. I think there's a little on the um, replacing a couple of kids, and I think there was a kid that got injured in the fall camp, which some of the things that I saw was certainly a little bit of a concern with them going up against Oklahoma's defensive line. But no, I mean, I think this gives Oklahoma a really good barometer check to see how good defensively they are, and I think it's a good. You would like to see, as I mentioned, I think no more than 14 to 17 points. And I say that, but I think it's very critical to understand where those points come from. If they give up 17 points, if you give up a late touchdown, then maybe that's a little bit of a different scenario. But I think Oklahoma has they're starting with Tulane, where they have an opportunity to kind of crank it up defensively and see how much improved they can be.
One issue with Tulane is, they can score, but they also give up a little bit on defense. So this team actually was pretty stout up front. Their issues were with the back seven because they lost their all-time sack leader. He's gone, Patrick Johnson. And actually, all their playmakers on the defensive front are gone from last year. But they've got some pretty impressive tackle statistics, productivity there coming back at linebacker. Dorian Williams in a short season had 98 tackles. So anytime somebody exceeds 100 tackles in a season, they're making some plays. Now, obviously, the defense may funnel it their way, but 98 tackles in a short season, 16 and a half tackles for loss. Nick Anderson also had 88 tackles, 10 and a half tackles for loss. Marvin Moody with 72 and Kevin Henry with 48. But again, they get in a Colorado transfer, a starting safety for the Buffs last year in Darian Rakeshaw. But otherwise, the Tulane defense was a bit of a sieve in their 2020 season.
Yeah, Mark. So I think this is unfortunately for Tulane, it's probably the strength of Oklahoma's, specifically with the running back depth, issues that we talked about. I think the strength of Oklahoma, at least early on, could be the passing game. So I think you'd mentioned how they struggled a little bit on the backside. They gave up 20. I think they averaged 28 points per game. They gave up 422 yards per game total offense, which isn't this isn't completely terrible, but the backside they gave up 280 yards per game throwing the ball downfield. So I think that's the advantage certainly that Oklahoma has in this game. I think it's a little bit of a strength on weakness situation for Oklahoma, and I think it's another good opportunity for. Oklahoma should be able to. You would think if they have problems moving the ball, then certainly there's some greater problems. But I think it allows them to get in a spot where they're more solidified in what their rotations look like. In the from a receiver perspective. From a receiver perspective, you've got about 6 or maybe even 8 guys that have an opportunity to play for Oklahoma at the receiver position, and then some guys at the tight end spot as well. So I think Oklahoma will have specifically the first 2 games to really kind of look and solidify what that looks like from a depth and rotation. I think when you look at a guy. When you look at Theo Weiss and Mike Woods, those guys will probably play a lot. Mike Woods may bring a little bit more to the table in terms of being able to go deep, and then also being able to catch those balls over the middle. Whereas Theo Weiss may be more of a possession type receiver, not necessarily a big deep threat to stretch the defense. But I think Oklahoma has a good mix of those types of kids. You got a Mario Williams that should be able to stretch the field a lot. Maybe he's much more in the Marquise Hollywood Brown mold, being able to either stretch the field long or take that short pass and take it the distance. So yeah, I think it's a good, certainly a good first test for them, just to look and see what that looks like, and which you would expect them to roll pretty consistently early on, in this game Saturday.
So, Jason, I don't know if you're a big believer in the Football Power Index. I don't know if we've discussed it much here. I've debunked it at times. What I would like to see, before I completely debunk it, is just that I would like to see what were those win probabilities at kickoff, and then who won the game. And so then we can start to put together some kind of track record for this thing, because I don't know if anybody's ever tracked this to say this thing's extremely accurate or it's really not. I've seen some crazy numbers, both from the standpoint of prior to the game, and the most egregious one I can think of came last year when Miami played Louisville, which I thought Miami was a better team. And this was before Louisville fell off the rails and they were coming off a decent 8-5 year. So they were the home team. They had an 83% chance of winning Louisville. And I was like, what? So I've seen a lot of those where I was like, where does this come from? But I think what is even more inaccurate is late in ball games, you'll see where a team will be down in a predicament, but not a ridiculous predicament. They're down 2 touchdowns with 5 minutes left. That's not a good situation to be in. Your chances of winning are low, but they're not 0.1% low. And I will routinely see this. So-and-so came back from 14 down and won the game. And both teams are roughly the same level teams. And they had a 0.1% probability at the time and I'm like, what? Did these people watch college football? They were down by 2 touchdowns with 5 minutes left. Yeah, they were in a bad spot. And I would say it was more like 7 or 8% chance of winning, not 0.1%. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I've paid attention to it to a certain degree, and I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, specifically, that I think they have that. They'll show the percentage as certainly as the game is unfolding. Exactly to your point. If that team was down 35 points with 4 minutes to go, yeah, I think you could get there to that one. But yeah, I mean, 14 down with 5 minutes to go, that's not out of the realm of possibilities, even if the teams aren't completely even. I mean, for instance, look at Oklahoma last year against Kansas State. I mean, how many? I would be interested to see what Kansas State's percentage of win was when they were down 35-14 there in the third quarter.
One of the strangest ones I remember seeing was, and I'll have to plug in something in just a second or I'm going to lose it, is in the AFC Championship game, Patriots-Jaguars. Jacksonville was up 10 points with like 9 minutes left in the game. And they're at New England. We know New England's the favorite. They're the supposed better team going into the game. I'm thinking at that point, it's almost still 50-50 because I've got a lot of confidence New England's going to come back in that game and win it. And they gave it some ridiculous, like 99.7%. And I'm thinking, what? So anyway, I just have a lot of issues with that. But then again, I would like to see metrics placed to the prediction record of that, and maybe it would turn out to be, it's not going to be infallible, of course. I'm not raising it to that kind of standard, but I would just like to see some studies done on how accurate it is. So Jason, what do you think the win probability is for Oklahoma in this game against Tulane according to the FPI?
I mean, it's got to be in the upper 90s. I would say with them being favored by 31, I would say 98%.
Now, see, I don't know if they've adjusted this with the change of location, but it was at 93.3.
Okay.
And I'm guessing that it's that low because they're playing at Tulane. That's another thing. I think they're a little heavy on the home road portion
Sure.
of that.
Well, and I think they were, when you just look at the line movement, I think Oklahoma was about a 26-point pick when it was at Tulane, and now it's 31. So I think typically you see, anywhere from a 3 to 5 point scale given to the home field advantage. Some are obviously greater than others. So, yeah, I would. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good wondering if they've adjusted that based on the change of the venue.
Jason, someday when we have our 50-person staff here at the Voice of College Football, we'll have somebody just track that. That will be their job.